The death of the king and the end of the age. Matthew 27:45 to 56. Matthew records the climactic moment of the gospel narrative in Matthew 27:45 to 56. The crucifixion reaches its culmination as Jesus hangs upon the cross, and the events surrounding his death reveal that far more is taking place than the execution of an innocent man. The scene unveils the conclusion of the Old Covenant order and the accomplishment of redemption. Matthew writes, "Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land unto the 9th hour." The darkness that covered the land from noon until 3 in the afternoon was not merely a natural phenomenon. Throughout the scriptures, darkness is frequently associated with divine judgment. The prophets used this imagery to describe the day when God would judge nations and bring an era to its conclusion. The darkness here therefore signals that a decisive moment in covenant history has arrived. The old world of the law, sacrifices, and temple-centered worship is passing away as the Messiah bears the weight of judgment. At the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" These words come from Psalm 22, a psalm that vividly portrays the suffering of the righteous servant. By invoking the opening line, Jesus identifies himself as the one to whom the entire psalm ultimately points. Psalm 22 moves from suffering to vindication, from humiliation to the declaration that God's righteousness will be proclaimed to future generations. In this cry, Jesus stands in the place of Israel, carrying the curse that belonged to the covenant-breaking nation. Some who stood nearby misunderstood his words and thought he was calling for Elijah. In Jewish expectation, Elijah was associated with the coming day of the Lord. The bystanders interpreted the cry through their own expectations, waiting to see whether Elijah would appear to rescue him. Yet the rescue that was taking place was far greater than they imagined. Matthew continues, "And Jesus cried again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit." The language is significant. His life was not taken from him unwillingly. He willingly released his spirit. The death of Christ was not an accident of history, but the deliberate completion of his mission. With this final breath, the sacrificial work is finished. Immediately, Matthew records a series of extraordinary signs. Behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The veil separated the holy place from the most holy place in the temple. It symbolized restricted access to God under the Old Covenant system. Only the high priest could pass beyond it, and that only once each year with sacrificial blood. The tearing of the veil from top to bottom demonstrates that God himself removed the barrier. The system of priesthood, sacrifices, and temple mediation had reached its fulfillment. Access to God would no longer be regulated through the structures of the law. The death of Christ accomplished what those sacrifices pointed toward, but could never achieve. Matthew then records that the earth shook and the rocks were split. These cosmic disturbances echo the prophetic imagery associated with the arrival of God in judgment and deliverance. When God acted decisively in history, the language of earthquakes and shaking was often used to describe the upheaval of an old order. The graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. These saints appeared in the holy city after his resurrection. The opening of the graves demonstrates that the power of death itself had been broken. The death of Christ was not merely the end of his life, but the turning point in the story of redemption. The resurrection life that would soon be revealed in him begins to manifest itself even in this moment. The response of the Roman centurion and those guarding Jesus is equally significant. Seeing the earthquake and the events surrounding the crucifixion, they declared, truly, this was the Son of God. This confession coming from Gentile soldiers stands in striking contrast to the rejection of many within Israel's leadership. The Gospel of Matthew repeatedly anticipates the inclusion of the nations, and here at the foot of the cross, a Gentile recognizes the identity of the crucified king. Matthew also notes that many women were present, watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. These women had followed Jesus from Galilee and ministered to him. Their presence emphasizes the continuity of faithful witnesses throughout the ministry of Jesus. While many disciples had fled, these women remained as observers of the moment when the redemptive work reached its completion. In these events, the narrative reveals that the crucifixion is not merely a tragic death, but the decisive act through which the entire covenant system reaches its fulfillment. The darkness, the torn veil, the earthquake, and the opened graves all testify that a transition in God's redemptive plan has occurred. The Messiah has borne the judgment of the covenant. The barrier between God and humanity has been removed, and the power of death itself has been overcome. The cross therefore stands as the moment when the old order passes away and the work of redemption is fully accomplished through the death of the Son of God.